And hopefully that is all good and going. The video's playing again. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for everyone's time and for coming tonight. I'm excited to talk to you, like Caroline said, about specifically North Atlantic right whales, but I'll also be discussing some other marine mammals in the Bay of Fundy, some of which you might see in your backyard. I know your society is located in Wolfville, a little off the Bay of Fundy, but it's a short trip to see a lot of these species up close. So this video here is of a surface active group of North Atlantic right whales. So sometimes they're seen in these groups at the surface, socializing, cavorting. There's this female here whose name is Aphrodite because she has a heart shape on her lower back, as you can see, and there's a few males with her in this video. So this was taken with a drone, and I'll get more into the research I'm doing with drones to study whales. So really cool footage. So I'm a fourth-year PhD student at the University of New Brunswick in St. John, also on the Bay of Fundy, but I'm originally from New Jersey in the US, and what brought me here to New Brunswick was the opportunity to study whales, and I'll get more into that. But for any of you who are passionate about marine mammals or thinking of starting a new career, I just say it's always possible to try something new and do something you're passionate about. As a kid, my parents took me to all sorts of aquariums, beaches, and I grew this love for our oceans and turned it into a career. So yeah, when people say, you could achieve your dreams, it can be done. And this has always been my dream. And specifically, the constant in my life has always been this interest in marine mammals specifically. So I still get excited, just as excited, anytime I see a dolphin, anytime I see a whale, any marine wildlife. So when I talk about what a marine mammal is, so there are a variety of species found around the globe. They are mammals like us, so they breathe air, they give birth to live young, they nurse their young, and they all have hair. So even dolphins, whales have little sensory hairs on their head. And most of them also have insulative layers of blubber or fat, and they depend on the ocean for most or all of their needs, so including polar bears. And what's important to note is that all marine mammals are evolved from terrestrial ancestors. So life started in the sea, moved onto land, and marine mammals moved back into the water. So your manatees and dugongs, often found in tropical waters, their closest relatives are elephants. And you can kind of see how they started out with 4 limbs and eventually lost those limbs into what we see as the manatee today. And cetaceans, or whales, dolphins, and porpoises, their closest terrestrial relatives are hippos. You can kind of see they started out as these kind of rat-like creatures, and again, lost those hind limbs. What's really interesting to know is that the skeletons of these animals still have leftover hip bones, but they are not used for anything anymore. So I'd like to talk about the marine mammals that you can see around St. John. So next time you go out, you can go, I think that's a such and such. And there are quite a lot of species you can see from shore, or if you happen to go on a whale watch or take a boat out, lots of different species you can see. So we have 2 main species of local seals. And the best way to see them is when they're hauled out on rocks. So they will sunbathe to get warm, but they'll also swim, and you'll see their heads come up above the water. So we have the harbor seal, which I think its face resembles a puppy dog. They're commonly known as sea dogs. I know we have some sports teams here named the Sea Dogs. That's after the harbor seal. They're like a speckled color, about 6 feet long. And then we have the gray seal, which is slightly larger, gray or brown in color. and they have this horse-like face. So their snout is kind of elongated. And sometimes when they're far off in the water, it's really hard to tell these two species apart unless they're like sitting next to each other. But again, that elongated face is very distinctive of gray seals. And in St. John, we do have an organization who conducts population surveys of these different seals. They'll go out with binoculars and count them around at different haul out sites. So you can learn more at their website. We also have several species of local dolphins, and these are very social animals, so they're often observed in groups or pods. So we have the Atlantic white-sided dolphin, which has this kind of whitish yellow stripe near the back. And usually you won't see this unless they jump out of the water, which they do tend to do on occasion. We have the white-beaked dolphin, which again, they're all kind of similar, so hard to tell apart when you just see the dorsal fin or this fin on their back come above the water, but they kind of have some white running down the side as well. And then we have the short-beaked common dolphin, which has a yellowish white patch closer to the eye, between the eye and the dorsal fin. So again, they will jump out of the water, which is probably your best opportunity to tell them apart. Otherwise, you're just going to see the fin when they come up to breathe. We also have porpoises, and I want to emphasize that a porpoise is different taxonomically than a dolphin. They're all dolphins and porpoises are whales, but not all whales are dolphins or porpoises. It's a tricky scientific distinction. But porpoises are unique. They're smaller than dolphins in general. They have a much blunter snout. Their dorsal fin is also quite triangular, so it comes to a peak rather than falcate or curving back. And if you ever happen to be in a porpoise's mouth, hopefully not, you'll notice that porpoises have spade-like teeth rather than dolphins will have like canines or sharp pointed teeth. So these are just a few ways to tell porpoises apart, but the porpoises will generally come in closer to shore than your dolphins. So probably if you're sitting close to shore and you see some triangular fins, they're porpoises. We also have some bigger baleen whales. And when I say baleen whales, they don't have teeth. Instead, they catch their prey with these baleen plates. And baleen is made out of keratin, which is the same material as your fingernails and your hair. Basically acts as a spaghetti strainer. So when the whale engulfs some water, they can filter the plankton out of the water using this like hair-like strainer. And we have humpback whales, and these are very distinct because of their very long white flippers. They also on their face have these bumps called tubercles. Minke whales are the smallest of the species in this area. They have shorter flippers with kind of a white streak. We have fin whales, which is actually the second largest species of whale, second to the blue whale, which typically isn't found in the Bay of Fundy, but are found in Canada. These whales, the fin whales, are very sleek and long, and they have asymmetrical coloring on their jaw. So the right side is white and the left side is a grayish color, which is pretty cool. And then we have North Atlantic right whales, and I'm going to get more into this species, but they are distinct from the other whales first because they have no fin on their back. It's completely smooth. They have no dorsal fin. They're more of a black color, and their flippers are shaped more like a paddle than a flipper. They also are unique from the other whales because they have what's called callosities on their head. And callosities are also made of the keratin in our hair and fingernails. And each individual actually has a unique callosity pattern. I'll get into how we use those to identify individuals. And so most people will not be in the water or above whales. They're usually seeing them from a boat or from land. And you can sometimes tell apart the blows based on the species. So humpbacks have really big bushy blows. Minke whales, if you can even see their blow, so it's actually, they're not spitting water out of their blowholes. They're the water that rests on top of their head gets so forcefully ejected when they exhale that it forms this vapor. So that's what we call a blow. But minke whales, you barely see a blow, if at all. So if you see a whale with a small dorsal fin, probably a minke whale without the blow. Fin whales, being very large, they shoot water really high up in this kind of column-shaped blow. And then right whales are unique because their blowholes are kind of slanted, and they shoot water out in two different directions to make a V-shaped blow. So a cool way to try to tell the whales apart from afar. That's what we use as scientists in the field to try to distinguish the species. So I'm going to dive in a little more with North Atlantic right whales. So unfortunately, this species is critically endangered. It's thought that they can live to be 70 years old, but it seems like the average lifespan is actually around 35 years. And this is largely due to human activity, which I'll get into. So we're basically halving the lifespan of this species. Females become mature around 7 to 10 years, and males are a little later, about 15 years. And mating occurs year-round, and calves are born in the wintertime in warmer waters down in the southeast United States. And they do have two cousins or similar species of their genus. We have the North Pacific right whale, which we probably know even very, very little about. And then we have the southern right whale, which is found around the southern hemisphere. But these are distinct species from the North Atlantic right whale. And so North Atlantic right whales are found up and down the east coast of the United States and Atlantic Canada. So as I said, they give birth to calves in their calving grounds off of Florida and Georgia in the late fall through the winter. And they'll migrate up the coast, and they feed in Cape Cod Bay area, Martha's Vineyard, the shoals and the New England area here. They use the Bay of Fundy, Roseway Basin, and I'm going to get into how the distribution has changed a bit in the last decade. But I mentioned that they have unique callosities on their head. And so you can see in each of these photos, these are each different whales. They have different patterns like thumbprints. So researchers use these unique callosity patterns to track individuals through time. There's a lot of information on demographics, so we know which ones gave birth to which, so whose mother is whom. And it's really cool that we can track these lineages over space and time. And that's how we know approximately how many there are. So North Atlantic right whales got their name from the whaling era when they were considered the right whale to hunt. And this was because when they died, they had so much blubber that they would float at the surface, making them easy to harvest. And it's thought, so this is a graph here of abundance over time. It was thought that pre-whaling, the population was already pretty small, so around 2,000 individuals, maybe less. But you can see that once whaling started, they were hunted nearly to extinction. So it was thought that like in the 1900s, there were probably fewer than 100 individuals left. And there was a moratorium placed on hunting right whales in 1931, and the species started to recover. But since the 2010s, mortalities have significantly increased and births have declined. And as of 2021, the best estimate of the size of the population was 340 whales, with fewer than 100 of those being reproductively active females. So why are we starting to see this alarming decline again? Well, in the words of a colleague of mine, Dr. Michael Moore, we're still whaling by accident today. So even though there's a moratorium, whales are still dying because of human activity. So it's estimated that at least 86% of the population has been entangled in fishing gear at some point in the whale's life, with some being entangled over 6 times. And between 2003 and 2018, a 15-year period, we documented 22 mortalities from entanglements. In addition, we documented 16 mortalities in that same time period due to collisions with vessels. On top of this, climate change has changed the quality, quantity, and distribution of right whale prey, primarily these small rice grain sized plankton called copepods. And so the whales are struggling to acquire enough nutrition to give birth to calves and survive some of these injuries. So it's like a trifecta of a perfect storm for these whales, unfortunately. And so what's also behind this recent decline since 2010 is that these whales have changed their foraging or their feeding distribution. So before 2010, during the summer months, whales were primarily found in the Bay of Fundy and also Roseway Basin and a bit in Great South Channel. But we see that after 2010, fewer whales have been seen in the Bay of Fundy and Roseway Basin. Honestly, in the past 3 years that our lab has been doing research in the Bay of Fundy, we have not observed a single right whale, even though there have been a few other people who have observed them, but they used to be here, but like 100 of them would be in the Bay of Fundy at once. Instead, they're starting to move into the southwestern Gulf of St. Lawrence. And the unfortunate part about that is, given that we knew they were using the Bay of Fundy historically, we had regulations in place to avoid overlap between whales and fishing and shipping. But suddenly they showed up in the Gulf of St. Lawrence and there's so much human activity there, a lot of fishing, a lot of shipping. So we see more anthropogenic trauma, more mortalities, and we're also seeing fewer calves born since 2010. So what are we doing to save the North Atlantic right whale? It's a unique case where we know what's happening to the whales. We know what the threats are. And so how can we help them? And so I'm going to go through 4 different things that we're doing: research, management, rescue, and outreach and education. So I'll start with research, specifically whales as well as their prey. And this is a lot of what we do at the lab that I work at UNB. So how do we study whales? They're challenging. First of all, they barely come out of the water. They're not like seals where they come up onto land so we can observe them closely. They hold their breath for long times and dive deeply. So you see one over here, it goes down, 15 minutes later, it might come up over here and you have to follow the whales around if you want to observe them. And I also mentioned they have these large migratory ranges, so we really don't know exactly where they're going to be at any point in time, making them very hard to find. So we use a variety of observation platforms. Since the North Atlantic right whales come close to shore, they have a coastal distribution. We can observe them from land, although this is limited because if they go offshore, we can't really see them very well. We've put people up in planes and observe them from above, but obviously we can't get super close to the whales with the planes. So we often go out in research boats. We can't cover as much territory as we can with the planes, but we can get more detailed and closer metrics of these whales with boats. We also use a variety of technologies to study the whales. We can put hydrophones or underwater microphones underwater and listen for the calls that these whales make, which are distinct from other species. We can put tags on whales. I will say it's difficult to tag a North Atlantic right whale because they seem to be very slippery and they like to touch each other and knock the tags off. So this here is a suction cup tag that can transmit data like how deep a whale dives, a GPS location. It can also look at how the whale's swimming. And of course, we use cameras and binoculars to observe whales. And more recently, we've started to use drones, and this is really exciting, at least I think so. So what is a drone? Some of you might have one or have seen them before. They're remotely piloted, meaning people are not in them, and they're aircrafts, and they come in different shapes and sizes. You have multi-rotor drones, which have multiple propellers, and fixed wing drones that look more like airplanes, and they can carry a variety of sensors to collect data. And I recommend that if you're as excited about this technology as I am, that you follow the hashtag drones for good on social media, because drones are being used for lots of cool stuff. They're putting out fires, they're saving drowning victims, They're going to start to deliver your packages probably, and they help us inspect hard to reach infrastructure. And so drone research in the wildlife realm is really taking off because it fills this unique sampling perspective in between land-based observations and planes and satellites. So it provides higher resolution than these higher altitude platforms, and it's less invasive than driving a boat, getting really close to a whale. They're also safer than occupied aircraft because it doesn't require putting a person up in the air. And they're becoming increasingly accessible, affordable, and reliable, and the technology is only going to continue to improve. So this is an example of a North Atlantic right whale that's diving as seen from a drone and as seen from a boat. So I took both these photos, and you can already see how we get so much more detail on the whale. We can even see the unique scar patterns on the tail that were probably due to a prior entanglement. And I mean, obviously people have better cameras than I do, but you get a lot more information from this photo than you would from an oblique angle. So here at UNB St. John, I work with a drone that we've nicknamed Maddie because she's a DJI Matrice. And Maddie is equipped with 2 payloads. So we have a thermal infrared camera that can also take visible spectrum or RGB videos at the same time. And then we have a higher resolution camera that takes visible spectrum images, and also a laser altimeter that allows us to know exactly how high the drone is above the water at any given point. So for my PhD thesis, I've gone out the past 3 summers. I'm not going out this summer. I'm done with field work. I'll have field work FOMO this year, but now it's time to analyze all the data. But the past 3 summers, we went out and I flew 118 flights over a variety of species, mostly right whales and humpback whales. And you can see in this image how we've got the drone. And there I mentioned the blow. This is a humpback whale here. And I'd like to play a little video of what it looks like when we launch the drone. So this is Natasha Hines, a master student in our lab who is trusts me a lot and hand catches and launches the drone off the vessel. So here's a video of that happening. All right, so that's what it looks like off in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And so I'm going to show a video now that of a humpback whale shown from both the visible spectrum or RGB on the left and our thermal video on the right, where white is hot and gray or black is cold. And you'll see that as the whale comes to the surface, I've kind of sped it up in between breaths. These blowholes show up as hot anomalies in the thermal video. You'll see that again here. Cool. And then the whale dives. So what are we doing with these drone images besides showing them to people and exclaiming how cool they are? So we can collect from those high resolution still images, what's called photogrammetry. So this is where if you know the altitude of your drone and the focal length of your camera, you can scale the pixels in an image and say this pixel is X centimeters. And so we can then derive absolute measurements of whales in photographs, and we can start to assess body condition. So we can look at ratios of length and width, so we can compare how fat or skinny a whale is. With the thermal imagery, I'm really interested in whether we can get absolute temperatures of the blowholes. So again, they show up as those hot anomalies, and whether those temperatures are representative of the core body temperature of a whale. And if we combine those two data sets, I want to see, does blowhole temperature correspond with body condition? In other words, when a whale is skinny, is it mean it can get it's sick or has a fever? Do whales get hypothermic? Or if they're skinny, do they lose a lot of heat because they don't have as much blubber? So we can finally, because we can't stick a thermometer in a live free swimming whale's mouth, we can hopefully measure body temperature remotely with drones. So working on analyzing those data and hope to have some results for you soon on whether that can be, how accurately we can do that. I also wanted to touch on another cool technology that's being used to detect and monitor whales. So another PhD student in our lab, Cody Carlisle, is using satellite imagery to detect whales. So yes, this is crazy. Satellite images now have 30-centimeter resolution. So sure enough, sometimes you just have to squint a little harder than other times, but yes, we can detect whales in satellite images. So Cody's looking a little more into the conditions that make that possible. All right, so we study the whales, but we also study their prey, because where the prey is, we predict that the whales will be there too. But there are challenges with studying their prey. These plankton live at depth, so they're not necessarily on the surface. They're very small. Like I said, copepods, the primary prey of North Atlantic right whales, are about the size of a grain of rice. And so they're very hard to observe. Here's my advisor, Dr. Kim Davies, who's got a little tiny krill on her thumb. It's cool to think that these huge animals eat the smallest things, just a lot of them. And so at UNB St. John, we use a variety of sensors to study whale prey. We tow nets underwater to collect plankton, and then we can identify what species of plankton are there, and we can estimate how much of that plankton is in the water column. We can also deploy a cage that has a bunch of underwater sensors attached that measure salinity, temperature, and depth. We can use sonar to try to estimate, like we listen for the echo off of clouds of plankton underwater. Also, we have optical sensors that like kind of shoot mild lasers and use different optical sensors to estimate abundance of plankton in the water column. We also deploy oceanographic gliders, which are basically underwater drones. These can go out for weeks to months at a time, and they profile the water column up and down and can go over large horizontal scales. They can collect a lot of like temperature, salinity, depth, plankton abundances, but they also have those hydrophones on board so they can listen for whales. And so we have a postdoc, Kate Indek, and another PhD student, Andrea Mesquita, who are analyzing the data from these gliders. So to get this very much broader perspective of right whale feeding habitats. And so our goals, why study the plankton? Again, the idea is that we can compare the plankton data to whale presence and environmental variables so we can predict where these whales are going to occur. We can also estimate how much plankton is around and whether this is enough to support a healthy population. And the objective here is also, if we can predict where the whales are going to be based on where the plankton is, we can hopefully mitigate the human impacts in these important feeding areas. Okay, so now I'm going to transition to what's being done in terms of rescue operations. So oftentimes we get reports of whales being entangled or injured, and I will emphasize that it is important that highly trained personnel intervene in these cases and not the public. So I've put this number up here, and I'll be sure to send Caroline a bunch of links and resources after the presentation, because this is all this is a phone number everyone should plug into their phone and have handy. But because rescue operations are dangerous both to the whales and to people, so you have to be highly trained in order to do this. So definitely call if you think you see a whale in distress. We have a bunch of organizations that respond to injured, entangled, sick, dead whales in Canada. And it's important to know that there are variable outcomes. Not every intervention is successful, which is why we can't use this as a Band-Aid solution for human impacts. We need to stop the entanglement, stop the ship strikes, because this is not a sustainable way to help whales. And unfortunately, we see a lot of these animals dying because of entanglements, because of ship strikes. I wanted to give you a case study of snow cone. And if anyone here has seen Last of the Right Whales, which is a documentary our group was in, and I'll provide more information later, you might already know about snow cone. So snow cone is a 17-year-old North Atlantic right whale. In December 2019, she gave birth to her first calf. And anytime there's a calf, it's like a celebration because there's so few that are born each year in the teens the past few years. In June of 2020, the calf was struck by a vessel and unfortunately found dead. Then the following year, snow cone was found entangled, and there were lots of disentanglement attempts, and they were able to remove some of the trailing line. What was amazing was that in December 2021, snow cone was seen with a new calf. She was the first North Atlantic right whale documented to have a calf while actively entangled. So you can see there was just a bit still of trailing line coming out of her mouth, but certainly they were able to remove any weight that was pulling on the line. Now, this was a tragically inspiring story until 2022, when a group of colleagues observed snow cone without that calf. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that the calf passed. Sometimes calves wean earlier than a year, but we would have expected the calf to have been with its mom at this point in time. And then on top of this, last fall, snow cone was seen with a new entanglement and in very poor body condition. And it's thought that she probably will not survive that entanglement. And unfortunately, this is not a unique story. I've picked one whale out here, but so many lineages have this type of story. And I think it's really important that people start to become aware of what's going on with these whales. So I want to talk a little bit about the management, what the government is doing in order to protect these whales. So that's in terms of regulating vessel traffic and fishing. And so, as I mentioned, the whales shifted their distribution to the Gulf of St. Lawrence around 2010, which spurred the Canadian government to start taking action. And my PhD advisor and a colleague published this paper kind of summarizing all the management actions that the government started to take. So in terms of fishing management, DFO has divided the Gulf of St. Lawrence into lots of little grid cells. And there are lots of aerial surveys. We have the gliders go out and listen for whales. We have moored buoys with hydrophones. We have vessels that go out and look for whales. We might start to use satellites as well. So anytime a right whale is detected in one of the grid cells, that grid cell and all the grid cells touching that grid cell are closed to fishing for 15 days, meaning fishermen have to go in, remove their gear for 15 days. If another detection is made within that same area during days 9 through 15 of that closure, those grids are closed for the entire season to fishing. And this includes both visual and acoustic or hydrophone detections. So this is just an example in 2021 of how much of the Gulf of St. Lawrence was actually closed to fishing over the course of the summer, from May to July to October, where black are permanent closures and red are temporary closures. So I think one of the most important technologies that's being developed to save not just whales, but all marine animals is on-demand fishing gear. So this illustration shows how whales hit vertical lines from fishing gear and can get wrapped up in their flippers, in their tails, in their mouth. However, the idea with on-demand fishing gear is that everything's on the bottom. And when the boat is ready to haul up the traps, they would ping an acoustic signal from their phone, and it would release a buoy that would ascend to the surface, and then they can haul in the traps. This is kind of an oversimplification of the technology, but the idea is that we would eliminate the vertical lines in the water until the fishermen are ready to pull their gear. So this is huge. This would really reduce the risk of these animals getting entangled in the vertical line. In addition, Transport Canada has been working with researchers to develop shipping regulations for vessels that are over 13 meters in length. So we have this diagram shows all the different closures and areas where speeds of vessels are regulated. We have restricted areas, we have static zones, the ones in pink, where ships can't go faster than 10 knots. We have these dynamic shipping areas where if a whale is seen, there's a temporary slowdown implemented, but if when they're not, when no whales have been seen, ships can operate as normal. There's also a voluntary slowdown area where mariners are advised to go less than 10 knots. So again, a lot of dynamic management happening in Canada in terms of fishing and shipping. All right, so the last bit, I'll talk about outreach and education, and I think this is becoming a more and more important aspect of helping North Atlantic right whales. So like I'm doing tonight, I'm hopefully spreading awareness about what's going on with these critically endangered whales. It's been one of the more rewarding parts of my research, is especially because the drone imagery is very impactful, and people can get to see these whales from a whole new perspective. So I think that science communication is extremely important. The more you can spread this message, the better. We had the privilege, our lab, of being featured in the Last of the Right Whales documentary. And if you haven't seen it yet, it's streaming now on CBC Gem. You can also rent or purchase it. And it's a great summary of not just our work, but all the work that's being done in Canada, the US. You know, we often morbidly joke that there are more researchers studying these whales than there are whales left. And I hope we can turn that around in the future. Again, I'm going to share with Caroline so she can distribute this to your group, the different websites so you can learn more. We have our lab website where we have lots of interesting projects with plankton and whales and ocean technology. I'd also suggest, if you're interested in learning more about right whales and knowing what's going on with their population, to sign up for the quarterly newsletter that's distributed by the North Atlantic Right Whale Consortium. There's also a cool portal called Whale Map, and the Canadian version is Whale Insight, where you can go in and see where whales have been seen. It's an interactive map, so you can look up different detections in different areas from different, whether it's from a plane, whether it's from a glider, whether it's from a boat. So a really cool tool just to see where the distribution of whales has been over the past I think it's got at least 10 years of data on Whale Map. And ways that you can help out. So if you happen to find yourself out on a boat, always have someone looking out, making sure, surveying for wildlife to avoid collisions. And if you do happen to see a whale, first of all, if you see a North Atlantic right whale, I mean, enjoy that, because it's so rare these days. But do make sure you're keeping your distance and you don't want to disturb or harm them. If you're worried that a marine mammal, so not just a right whale, but any marine animal, this actually includes sharks, sea turtles, anything in the water. If you are concerned, you think it's in distress or dead, this is the Marine Animal Response Society number. If you do think you see a North Atlantic right whale, please call or email DFO. Photos are really helpful to confirm your sighting. So especially if you see that V-shaped blow, that's a great way to say, I'm pretty confident this is a right whale. And if you're looking for an organization to donate to, we work very closely with the Canadian Whale Institute, and they are home to the Campobello Whale Rescue Team that goes out, does research, and also actively cuts the rope off of these whales. So a great institute to donate to. So with that, I'd like to thank Caroline for helping to organize this session, and thank you all again for joining me tonight to listen to North Atlantic right whales. I'd like to thank UNB, a bunch of different programs and organizations that have helped me accomplish my research. And I'd like to just thank our oceans and the whales, because without them, we wouldn't be here, literally. And so with that, I'm happy to take questions. Feel free, if you come up with questions after this, and you want to email me or follow me on social media, check out my website. I've got that information here too. So yeah, I think we've got about 14 minutes for questions. So maybe I'll leave this up, or I don't know, Caroline, if you want to field the questions.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gina, for a great talk.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and no rush on time. We can totally take questions, either put them in the chat or unmute, raise your hand and unmute. And I think give folks a moment. I certainly
no
have
problem.
questions too.
Quick drink.
Well, I'll start with my question.
Yeah, sure.
It's kind of big.
Yeah,
like,
okay.
Can you give, like, are there reasons to have hope? I know you said since 2010, numbers are going down. There's not as much birth, like calves, new calves are in the teens. It sounds like some of them are not even living past a year. Like, in your research, whether in the data or just like what you're seeing with your relationship with these creatures, like, do we have reason to have hope?
Yeah.
And what can we do beyond what you've told us to have more hope?
Yeah, well, this is a question that we get often. And like, if you get into right whale research, you got to be an optimistic person, because otherwise it's just really draining. I think there's hope, knowing that this species was hunted to like fewer than 100 individuals and bounced back to, I think it was 500 at one point. Like, there is potential, and I think they're resilient. Climate change is throwing a curveball, but I think, we have two very smart, capable countries working on this, the United States and Canada. So, like I said, it's all about, I think ropeless fishing gear is going to turn the game around. I think the more people know and make sustainable choices about whether they need their goods shipped really quickly, whether they need their seafood from certain places, like just making more responsible choices. And if you eat seafood, just getting to know where it's coming from and what practices those fishermen are using, making sure that they're maybe testing out this ropeless fishing gear. So I think there has to be hope. And I think the whales are tough and can bounce back.
Thank you. I see there's a question in the chat from Lee. Maybe I'll just read it. Is the seal population, miscellaneous species, changing habitat as well? For example, is there any evidence that the elephant seal is moving north into Canadian waters or northern North American waters?
Okay, I'll answer this to the best of my ability, because seals are not my strength, but to my knowledge, the seal, like harbor seals and gray seals, are doing pretty well. And I think at one point they had declined, but they've bounced back. And I know that's the Atlantic Coastal Action Program is doing a lot of that research, trying to figure out, where they are and how many there are at different times of year. In terms of the elephant seals, so elephant seals are on the West Coast, and I know you see them a lot in like California and Western US. Whether they've gone up into Canada, I don't know, but I do have colleague, Cody, did a lot of pinniped or seal work, and I can certainly ask them. So feel free to shoot me an email and I can follow up with that. But yeah, I know a little less about elephant seals, unfortunately. Mhm.
Okay, there's a couple questions coming in the chat, so I'm happy to read them, but if folks who are putting them there want to elaborate, by all means, feel free to unmute, but I'll read them, and that's a start. Do whales share common ways of communicating?
Great, yeah. So we do have some researchers in our lab working on whale acoustics, or the sounds that they produce. So North Atlantic right whales have a variety of sounds that they make. There's one called the gunshot that literally sounds like a gunshot. It's like a, and then they also do upcalls, which are whoop, whoop sounds, although a little lower in register. That's my best whale impression. And so we still don't know exactly what those mean in terms of whale language, what the context is when they use them. Different species have different types of calls. So that's what helps us be able to tell with the hydrophone data, whether we are hearing a fin whale, whether we're hearing a humpback whale or a right whale. I don't know if anyone knows if different species can communicate with each other, but there are like humpback whales have these very elaborate songs that they sing, which is really cool. And we haven't seen much evidence for that in right whales, but it's like we have some anecdotal evidence of right whales making songs, or at least repetitive patterns. So yeah, right whales are pretty solitary species, except for mom-calf pairs. They do come together in these surface active groups, but for the most part, they're kind of doing their own thing, and maybe there are other whales nearby. So yeah, there's lots of different types of calls, and they're certainly different by different species, different frequencies as well.
Maybe that ties into the next question in the chat, which is, do you ever see different whale species together?
Yeah, so the humpback, so North Atlantic right whales feed on the copepods, and most of the other species we see in these areas actually feed on some larger, feed on fish, krill. So your humpback whales and your fin whales and your minke whales are actually lunge feeders. So they engulf their prey, and they can catch, they're a little faster and sleeker, so they can catch bigger things. Whereas right whales, they skim, they just kind of swim slowly with their mouth open. So oftentimes we see right whales where the copepods are, and then humpback whales and fin whales where the fish are. A lot of times those are overlap in space and time. So yes, you'll see like some right whales over here, and then you go a mile away and then you see some humpback whales. But in terms of interacting, besides by accident, I have not seen that myself. But yeah, they can be kind of in the same habitats and areas at the same time, but feeding on slightly different things.
Right. There was also a comment that it was a good, fascinating and good presentation.
Thank you.
Why are whale prey getting less? Why are they declining?
Yeah, so this is a very complex question, and there are lots of answers. So it's easy to just say climate change and things are changing in the oceans. Basically, I'll try to summarize one of the mechanisms. So with ocean warming, currents are slowing down, specifically the Gulf Stream, which carries warm water up the coast of the United States into kind of off the shore of Nova Scotia area, into the northern Atlantic. And because that Gulf Stream is slowing, it means that it's meandering, or the warm water is kind of pooling in places it normally doesn't. So you're getting like the Bay of Fundy, Gulf of Maine are warming at crazy rates relative to the rest of the world. And this has a lot of impact on the ecology of plankton. So it changes the timing that they come out, they are hatching. It changes how much energy, like fat content the individual plankton have. And it does lead to some direct mortality of the plankton. So yeah, between that and like coastal development, there's a lot of complex oceanography into why the prey are declining, the quality, the quantity, and the distribution. So hopefully that's like a brief overview that's approachable. But yeah, that's a great question.
Any other questions from folks for Gina?
All great questions. So thanks for
Oh,
them.
I do have one question actually.
Yeah, sure.
So the Bay of Fundy, like traditionally has been a big feeding area for
Mhm.
right whales, and I had always like known that, but you said you haven't, your lab hasn't observed any in the past few years,
Yeah.
but there have been observations of right whales in the Bay of Fundy?
Yes. So whether it's from citizens report, like taking photos and being like, I think this is a right whale over here. We've had a couple other research groups that go out. There's a group off of the Grand Manan Whale and Seabird station, and sometimes the ferries will see stuff, and yeah, and then we'll go out there and the whales have moved and we can't find them. It's crazy how hard one or two whales is to find in the Bay of Fundy, but it is. So yes, we have not observed them, but there have been a handful, I'd say, between 1 and 5 over the past 3 years.
Wait, wow. Huh.
Yeah, definitely not to the numbers they used to be.
Okay, a couple more questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any forms of technologies that could be used to direct or divert the whales from the busy St. Lawrence so they don't get hit?
Yeah. So I know that they've tested, like on shipping vessels, they've tested making sounds to like spook the whales away from the boats. But a lot of times the whales, like, they're exposed to so much noise, or they like got spooked and went toward the vessel. So that didn't really work out. In terms of something I don't know. Yeah, so really acoustically, acoustics would be, I think, the only way to get at that. And yeah, it hasn't produced the results, at least from those shipboard trials, that I think we wanted it to. But if anyone has ideas, I would love to hear them. Yeah, I think that was really the only kind of avoidance technology that's been used. But they do put they're starting to put thermal cameras on research boats, so you can detect the hot blows from afar and hopefully avoid collisions. And those are also being put on land. So it's more about like, where are the whales and how can we just navigate around them versus forcing the whales away from certain areas.
Okay, two more questions here.
Yeah, sure.
How long does the right whale nurse her young?
So we think about a year. I think the max that's been observed is 2 years, and then the minimum is like 6 months. So somewhere in between there, but the average is usually a year. We usually don't see the moms again. So they'll give birth in the winter, and then we see the moms without their calves the following winter. So pretty quick. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A comment from Lois says, thanks so much for this great presentation. It brings tears. We saw 5 right whales 25 years ago off Grand Manan.
Oh, that's special. Yeah. I mean, I would have loved to have been in this area back when they were abundant. That's a cool thing to have seen.
Okay, a few more questions. Let's take a few more questions. How do the fishermen respond to the area closures? Ooh.
Yeah. So in Canada, what I've found here is that the fishermen are really involved in finding solutions. Of course, closures affect them, and they don't want to hurt whales. So a lot of them come to the table to try to figure out compromises. The government is starting to think about opening closed areas to on-demand fishing gear. So fishers could still go into closed areas as long as they're fishing with ropeless or on-demand gear. So that might be an incentive to use this technology. Of course, some are more on board than others. Certainly the US has had a little more pushback in certain lobster industry. But I will say we do our research from a fishing vessel. We charter a snow crab fishing vessel. And it's really cool that the fishers want to get involved and they want to help. So yeah, it's tough. And every year the management decisions change a little bit with feedback both from biologists and the fishing industry.
Okay, one more question in the chat here. Whale hunting by humans, what do they get out of the whale? Is hunting banned by government regulations?
Yeah, so meat, back in the old day, oil for candles, and yeah, I think it was like the primary way people lit their homes. So yeah, I think those were the two main products. And so there's the International Whaling Mission, I think it's the IWC, is the acronym, that most countries belong to, and the IWC has put forth a moratorium on all whale hunting, but there are countries that don't participate in that IWC and continue to hunt, whether it's, and they're also for subsistence. There are you can take whales or hunt whales for subsistence reasons in some areas. So yeah, I'm pretty sure the IWC is the main like governing body of whale hunting.
Great.
Yeah, great questions. Lots of them. Nice.
Any last comments or questions, or can wrap it up there? Still a little bit of sunshine coming out here.
Yeah. Same through the overcast clouds in St. John.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for coming out tonight to this nature webinar, and thanks Gina so much for sharing your research with us and your insights and education on right whales. I'll certainly forward on those links, and yeah, we'll be in touch about summer programming with the BNS and other nature programming and ways to get involved. We're doing a lot right now around forests and the land, so it's nice to have this talk on the oceans because we take care of it all. So yeah, I want to say a big round of applause to Gina. Thank you for the talk, and wish everyone a good night.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Lots of appreciation in the chat there.
Yeah, I see that there's a question about the births of calves declining, and so I'll just, as people are exiting, I'll touch on that. So it's thought that with the decline in prey, whales aren't acquiring enough body fat or energy reserves in order to get pregnant. So yeah, they're just too skinny and so they give birth to a calf, and usually the number of years for a female to recover from her last calf is like 3 years, but we're seeing it take like 7-10 years for a mother to have her second calf or her third calf.
Wow.
And so we think it's just because they're having such a hard time acquiring enough food, but also then a whale gets entangled or hit by a boat and they have to try to recover from that. So they're using up that energy that they're gaining. And so they, again, can't carry a fetus to term, or they're just not getting pregnant to start with. So in terms of solutions, we just have to like stop hitting them with boats and stop entangling them. It's hard to and also try to alleviate climate change, although that's a very nuanced remedy. We all have to contribute to that. So yeah, we just have to manage our activities better, I think.
That's the true answer.
Yeah.
Oh boy, lots of work ahead. But you got to care first. Thank you for answering.
Yes,
Thank you for
yes.
catching that. Thank you for answering.
No problem.
Great. Well, thanks so much.
Yeah, good. If you do have a recording link, I know like my family and friends love to watch. So I'd be happy,
Yeah,
and
for
I'll share
sure.
it. And I'll share it on social media too.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Cool.
I should
Yeah.
remember to stop recording.